Hey everyone, I have been doing a couple of videos as a setup to a series of videos that will be coming out about the basics of Scientology. I'll be deconstructing and breaking down the various basic beliefs of Scientology, sort of following along with the Scientology handbook and the Scientology.org website as to what they present as to what Scientology consists of, and I'll be giving some critical analysis of that information. But in order to do that series, I've been making a couple videos that have some explanatory material that you kind of need as if you've never been involved with Scientology, so that the whole subject kind of makes more sense. And if you're curious about Scientology, whether you're a Scientology watcher, somebody who's been in for a little while and been out, or somebody who was never involved with it in the first place, then I think these videos, the purpose of them is to help explain some of these, broad fundamental principles. Like I covered the development of the subject, and I covered the fact that Scientology is a faith-based belief system, even though it claims to be science-based. It's really pseudoscientific, and there are faith-based claims that you have to accept in Scientology, and I laid out in a video what some of the most basic of those are. So this week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the directives of Scientology, and maybe I'll come up with a better title than that. That's my working title for this video, but basically what I wanted to do is break down all the materials of Scientology, how they are put together. I already talked about individual books and individual, lectures and things that describe how Scientology developed from Dianetics to Scientology. This video is an effort to answer a question or make the materials of Scientology clearer, because it's a tremendous body of work. There's all these books, all these lectures, all these volumes of tomes of materials, and it can be very overwhelming to somebody who has not been involved in Scientology and didn't gradually sort of learn the ropes through indoctrination in LRON Hubbard's materials. So what I thought I would do in this video is try to maybe explain the different kinds of issues and books and things that Hubbard put out, to try to make it clear what that huge body of materials consists of, and maybe bring some simplicity to it. Some people might think this is going to be really boring, and I'll try to give enough interesting commentary along the way that it's not. But I feel that this is a necessary step before we tackle these basic Scientology principles. So for some people who have been familiar with Scientology for years, or know the lingo and know the layout of it all, maybe this won't be very informative. But I think for a lot of people who have had zero experience with it, or very little delving into how it's all put together, I hope that this will be helpful to you. So I've made a list here, and I'm gonna break it down here as to how LRON Hubbard went about presenting or releasing Scientology to the world. First off, you have the books of Scientology, and I'm going to show graphics as we go along here to show you what components I'm talking about. There are 18 basic books of Scientology that were all re-released, repackaged a few years ago, about I think about 10 or 12 years ago at this point. They're referred to as the basics, and they are the basic materials of Scientology. If you had nothing else but those books, you'd get a pretty good grasp of what the whole subject is about, even though those books wouldn't necessarily give you the way to go about doing Scientology in terms of how you audit or how you do the counseling in Scientology. That's not fully described in the books, but all the principles of the subject, and the thetan and the mind and the body, and how they all interrelate, and the electronics of it, because Hubbard brings electronics into all this. All of that, from Dianetics through to I don't know what the last book was, but there's New Slant on Life, and Problems of Work, and these books talk about how to use Scientology in the everyday world, or give little essays on uses of Scientology, and so all of these books cover that material, right? And Hubbard called, if I remember right, Hubbard called the books of Scientology the milestones in the development of it. And so you get a lot of books. Most of the books come from the 1950s. Very few books were written in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Hubbard had gone on to lectures and other issues that we'll cover when it came to the 60s and 70s and 80s. So then we have, but books, very, very important, right? Also, in addition to those basic books, you have an endless number of pamphlets and brochures, booklets, magazines, and compilations of L. Ron Hubbard's materials, which were put into other books and were put into book form. There was a book called "Have You Lived Before This Life?" and that was case studies, write-ups of people's experiences from an auditor training program that was done in the late 1950s. And they put this together as sort of their idea of proof and evidence of the existence of past lives. There are other compendium or compilation books. Child Dianetics was a book that L. Ron Hubbard did not write. It was taken from his lectures and works, and they put it together and called it that. And that book is not published anymore. So there's other materials that Hubbard put out in book form or booklet form, or the organization put out in these forms that you can also find. All right, now then we get to the lectures of Scientology, and we talk about the fact that Hubbard gave thousands of lectures. It's a huge quantity of information because every lecture was anywhere from a half hour to 90 minutes long. And there's over 3,000 of these lectures. So what I can do here is just basically talk about there are different kinds of lecture sets or lectures that Hubbard gave. There were raw public lectures, in other words, lectures that he gave to people come in right in off the street, no experience with Dianetics and Scientology at all, and he was lecturing to them about Dianetics and Scientology principles. An example of a series like this was a series called Human Evaluation, a lecture series, a special course in human evaluation. And this was given in 1951, I believe. And it was to businessmen in Wichita, Kansas, about the tone scale, the emotional scale and chart that Hubbard put together to be able to predict human behavior. And he gave these lectures to people who were not previously involved in Dianetics or Scientology. There were other lectures Hubbard gave like that to brand new public, I think in Phoenix, Arizona in 1954 and 55, that time period. I think those are all called the Golden Dawn lectures. Then you have another set of lectures, or another kind of lecture series that Hubbard gave, which were called congresses. And these were open to public, to new public, as well as Scientologists or Dianeticists. They would generally be weekend affairs, and he would give anywhere 6, 7, 8, 10 lectures, and they would do exercises and things like that, or practical sort of drilling between lectures. And it was sort of a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Saturday, Sunday affair. And Scientologists could bring their friends, and there was L. Ron Hubbard, right? Ooh, ah. And they'd do these congresses, and there were a bunch of these things that they gave. So when you see a lecture series that's called a Congress, there was a Success Congress, Freedom Congress, State of Man Congress, all these different congresses. The audience was brand new people and existing Scientologists. And Hubbard did not always hold back on the terminology that he was using when he was giving these congresses. So there sometimes is a lot of Scientologies given out in these, but Hubbard at least made an effort to talk to people who were not familiar with all the Scientology lingo. Then you have professional courses, and these were lectures that were given to auditor trainees. There were only a few of these that were given over the years, and they are also, very closely connected with professional lecture series were advanced clinical courses. But advanced clinical courses, or ACCs, were invitation only. And Hubbard, again, these were mostly the professional courses, and the ACCs were mainly predominant during the 1950s. I think there were 22 ACCs held. Invitation only, small number of auditors, very, very technical, really hard to listen to. So if you find yourself looking at a quote from or lectures that were from ACCs, you can expect to be given full blast, Scientology right between the eyes from LRON Hubbard, really super highly technical. In other words, a lot of weird rambling and storytelling, and very, very technical. He gets really into the nitty-gritty of how the auditing works and what it's doing in the person's mind and to him spiritually, and very, very difficult to understand. Okay, those were the ACCs. He expected that the people he was talking to had read Dianetics, had read Science of Survival, had read, in fact, all of the books, and were up to speed on everything that he had been talking about up to the point where he gave the ACC. Because these were the best and brightest in the world of Scientology, these ACCs. So that's those series. Now, there were other lectures that Hubbard gave in between these public events. Like, you'd have these public lectures, and people would be invited to them. They'd be talked about beforehand or promoted, posters, things like that. The ACCs were invitation only, as I understand it, so invitations were issued for these. The congresses were promoted well in advance. They were not last minute sort of deals. But there were other lectures recorded that Hubbard gave that were internal, internal to the world of Scientology, which were mostly organizational lectures. He might talk to the people who write letters about how to write letters, or how to get people sold on Scientology through writing letters. And remember, this is back in the 1950s and 60s when letter writing was kind of a thing for people, much more than it is now, where we have emails and instant messaging and Twitter and Facebook and that kind of thing. And letter writing has really become much more of a lost art than it used to be. So Hubbard had high expectations for people who were writing letters out of Scientology organizations to potential customers, or to get repeat business, right? And he talked, he gave lectures about that. Or he gave lectures about the organizing system of Scientology and how it was structured. And there's lectures about that. Lectures about how to do various jobs within the organization. So those were organizational lectures, not meant for broad public consumption. In fact, never meant for any public consumption. It was just for the staff members. Then, when the Sea Organization was founded in 1967, Hubbard gave Sea Org specific lectures. And those are a little hard to come by out in the big wide world here on the internet or anywhere. They're confidential lectures given on the Sea Org itself, the history of the Sea Org, the expectations of the Sea Org, how to do a Sea Org job. Hubbard had all kinds of stories to tell about the Navy and his experiences with that, and expected people who were in the Sea Org to live up to his standards and basically do his bidding, no matter what it was that he was bidding them to do. And he instilled in them through these lectures the idea of making it go right, and the supreme test of a Thetan, right? A Thetan being a spiritual being in Scientology. So the supreme test of a Thetan is his ability to make things go right, and despite whatever odds or problems might be on the person's plate, you're just expected to figure it out and make it work. This is all Sea Org stuff. So this was never meant for broad public consumption. This was just for Sea Org members. Hubbard also gave lectures briefing people on missions. In the Sea Org, you'll have people go out on special projects, and those are called missions. And it's not missions like the Mormons do missions, where they send people out for a couple years to proselytize. Sea Org missions might be a couple people sent to you know, the org and the Scientology church in Keokuk, because Keokuk isn't making, you know, money and isn't doing well, or maybe the executive director of Keokuk was just found cheating with the wife of, you know, one of the prominent public donors. And so this is, we got to replace the executive director. And so they spend a special project out there to deal with that. And there have been probably thousands and thousands of different missions that were sent out by the Sea Org over the years to deal with certain whatever situations they were dealing with. Sea Org missions are minimum of 2 people, but could be, you know, up to 10 people, you know, could be on a mission. And when a mission goes out, it's briefed. It's given a rundown on what to do, what to expect, and how to do their job. And back when Hubbard was running things, he was doing mission briefings, and these are included in the body of Scientology, Sea Org stuff. And so you have these briefing lectures. And again, this is all Sea Org only, but you'll find these things in the Sea Org. And there were bits and pieces of special stuff that Hubbard would throw into some of these briefings that made the missionaries feel special and made them feel like they could do things that other people couldn't particularly do. So all those different, you know, out of this huge body of 3,000 plus lectures, you can break it down into these different kinds and be more cognizant of what the lectures, who the lectures are for, what the lectures might contain, and, you know, what their relevancy is in the chronology and timeline of Scientology. Then we get HCO bulletins. These are, as you can see from the graphic here, put together in these red volumes. They're red volumes because HCO bulletins are printed in red ink on white paper, always have been. And the bulletins cover the technology or methodology and theory of Scientology as it's applied to individuals. Hubbard talks about this as the bulletins cover the first dynamic tech of Scientology, and there's a bunch of technical crap there, but really what he means is that the bulletins are meant to train auditors, or therefore technical personnel of Dianetics and Scientology, whether it's course room or classroom supervisors, auditors, word clearers, you know, people who are doing direct application of Scientology to another person or group of people. That would be the bulletins. And so the bulletins cover very technical stuff, right? How to do Scientology assists, how to do Scientology word clearing. This is stuff we're going to cover in that series of videos I'm going to be putting out about the basics of Scientology, all this stuff. Most of the material that will be covered in that series was first released in HCO bulletins. Oh, by the way, HCO stands for Hubbard Communications Office, and it was the Hubbard's Communications Office was obviously the part of the organization that dealt with getting Hubbard's communications out and getting communications back in to him. And these bulletins that he wrote would be typed up, recopied or mimeographed on mimeo machines with red ink on white paper, and sent out, distributed to all the churches and auditors all around the world. And that was how Hubbard got his word out to people. It wasn't just put in these volumes I showed you. Originally, in the 1950s, when Hubbard started issuing the bulletins, and through the 1960s and 70s, these bulletins would come out one at a time, and people would keep them in file folders and stuff like that because they weren't in tomes or volumes. That came in the late 1960s and early 70s. I think it was early 70s is when the first volumes of these bulletins were released in chronological order. That's how they're put together in those volumes. But people had files and files of these things, and they would be, sometimes the bulletins, in fact oftentimes, the bulletins would be changed and revised, and there was a whole system, which I won't get into right now, on how the numbering worked on that. And auditors or people who were doing Scientology would be kind of eager to get these bulletins because the bulletins would be the latest and greatest on Scientology technology and how to use it and how to do it. So they were kind of a big thing. and still are, right? Even though Hubbard's been gone for many, many years, the church still revises and changes and issues new bulletins, which they claim are as L. Ron Hubbard originally intended it to be. And they can get away with making any changes they want to it as long as they say that. So, and nobody who's you know, a public Scientologist really has any say in that because they don't know any better. Then you have HCO policy letters, and this is, you know, I've talked a lot in my videos about policy, and I've quoted L. Ron Hubbard's policies. Well, what I'm quoting are HCO policy letters. These are, as you can see in the graphic here, in these green volumes. And they're in green volumes because, you guessed it, it's green ink on white paper. That's how the policy letters are distinguished from the bulletins or from other issue types. As you'll see, there are many, many issues, types of issues in Scientology. Bulletins are one type of issue, probably the most common one. Then there's policy letters, the second most common one, these green on white ones. And they're also the most important ones. The bulletins and the policy letters, Hubbard said, are the senior issues of Scientology. The only thing that would take more precedent than the bulletins and policy letters would be the books and the lectures. But even the lectures have, you know, would actually be modified by the bulletins and the policy letters. So, you know, that's in terms of seniority. Policy letters have to do with how the organization is run. And they are either guidelines or operating principles for the organization, like this is our attitude about things, or this is how we're supposed to conduct our business. There's a policy letter called the First Policy, which is maintain friendly relations with the environment, as an example of a policy. Of course, Scientology sort of doesn't really do that so well these days, but they, you know, they try. So anything that's green ink on white paper is a policy letter. And it exclusively deals with how the organization is to conduct itself, how staff members are supposed to do their jobs, or the attitude and conduct of staff members in Scientology organizations. And policy letters apply to the C organization just as much as they apply to the regular city level churches. And policy also, of course, is enforceable on public Scientologists as well. Another example of a policy would be the reports that Scientologists are expected to write, like knowledge reports that, or, you know, there's a lot of different kind of reports actually. There's, you know, there's job endangerment reports and damage reports and knowledge reports and just endless numbers of waste reports, right? All these different reports. Well, there's a policy letter that lays out all the different reports. It's called staff member reports. And then there's another policy letter that specifically describes knowledge reports and why those are important, right? So these are policies of the organization. And you've seen, if you've been watching my channel probably for any length of time, you've seen me quote from the policy letters because, you know, the best way to expose what Dianetics and Scientology is all about is just quote what Hubbard said and let you guys be the judge. Because it's, you know, there's some pretty goofy stuff in some of those policies. All right, then we get, after policy letters, there's other issue types. And I'm not going to go into as much detail about them, but I'll just lay out a few of them so you get the idea. In the 1950s, there were professional auditor bulletins. These were black ink on white paper, and they were issued just like the technical bulletins were issued. The PABs, or the PABs, or professional auditor bulletins, came before the technical bulletins. They were sort of the precursor to it. I don't know why Hubbard went color coding on his issue types, but he did. I don't know where he got that idea from specifically. If any of you guys know, I'd be curious to find out. But that had the progression of it. In the early 1950s, it was professional auditor bulletins, and these things would be mailed out to Dianeticists and Scientologists who had officially signed up to be auditors with the various organizations. You also have L. Ron Hubbard Executive Directives. These are LRH-EDs, or LRH Executive Directives. These were only supposed to be good for a year, although Scientology holds on to them because they were the sacred writings of L. Ron Hubbard. They were printed in blue ink on white paper, and they were executive directives. They were orders he issued to handle specific situations organizationally around the world, sometimes broadly applicable to every organization and sometimes narrowly focused on one or two areas of specific interest. An example of an LRH executive directive is the issue that lays out the birthday game that I have talked about on my Q&A show. People have asked about this, and it's a production game that organizations play against one another to outproduce each other. Hubbard laid all this out as to what the game is, how to play it, and gave some tips about it in a LRH executive directive from 1982. Another specific LRH, that was broadly applicable to all organizations, but a specific LRH executive directive that Hubbard wrote in the 1980s was called John Travolta. And it's not easily found. I've actually never seen it. I just know it exists. And it lays out who specifically at that time was authorized to be dealing with John Travolta. So Hubbard had his finger in all kinds of pies there. Another issue type is an ethics order. This is something internal within Scientology where when you see people being declared suppressive people, they are usually declared with an ethics order. It's printed on goldenrod paper, yellow paper, with black ink, and those are, justice and ethics issues. If somebody receives an ethics action or a justice action in Scientology, it's put out on an ethics order and on goldenrod paper. You have HCO info letters or information letters, and HCO executive letters, and this letter and that letter. Hubbard came up with about 10 different kinds of HCO letters of various kinds, and he was just making up issues as he went, and you'll find some of these. Hardly any of this sort of stuff is easily found on the internet, but it's out there. Then you have Ron's journals. These were lectures or written issues that Hubbard wrote, which were sort of yearly updates, sort of State of the Union addresses on where Scientology stood, or broad info that he wanted the public to have. Ron's journals were meant for the public, the staff, kind of broad announcements to all of Scientology. And the most famous of the Ron's journals was RJ 67, which was numbered that way because he recorded a little lecture in 1967, and the RJ 67 is where he first talks about the broad conspiracy of 12 bankers and international financiers working against Dianetics and Scientology, and where he describes the XENU narrative, but he doesn't call it the XENU narrative. He just simply says that there was some horrible catastrophe that occurred here and on other planets in this sector of the universe 76 trillion years ago or million years ago or whatever the date was that he said. And I'm always forgetting if it's 67 million years ago or 76 million years ago or trillion years ago or whatever. Any of these numbers are equally ridiculous. But that RJ 67 is where he first talked about OT3. And so that's the most famous of them. But there were actually many RJs or Ron's journals that Hubbard gave over the years, all the way up into the 80s. So, so you can find some of those. Now, whole other kind of issue out there that you'll find, or publications that you'll find of Dianetics, are magazines. And every single organization of Scientology has its own magazine. Hubbard said that, that magazines were very important, that every organization was to issue their own, and they were to talk about the completions, what services people had completed, success stories, and local news and interesting bits that the local field around the various churches around the world would find interesting. Wedding announcements maybe, things like that, right? Or organizational news. So these magazines, Hubbard put a lot of stress on how important they were supposed to be. And he issued various ones, like from St. Hill back in the day. There was a magazine called The Auditor. There's a magazine called Source magazine, and I think that's the one that goes from Flag in Clearwater, Florida. And that's all about Flag and how great Flag is, right? This is for public. This is all meant for the broad public. There's an advanced magazine, which comes from the advanced organizations. Like there's an advanced mag from the Advanced Organization of Los Angeles, and that talks about OT wins and gains and pumps up getting people onto the OT levels, which are those confidential levels. Probably the most popular thing from the advanced mag, the one that everybody would turn the pages to read, was the section on OT phenomena, where people would share their testimonials about how amazing they were and what powers they had because they had gotten to the state of OT, operating Thetan, right? Like they found their car keys because they perceived where they were under the couch and they went and found them under the couch, right? Or the traffic lights changed because I was in a hurry to get to work. And so all the lights went from red to green exactly when I hit them because I'm so OT, right? Then you have the Freedom magazine, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. That is the official publication of the Office of Special Affairs, and that has to do with generally trashing people that the church doesn't like, is generally what Freedom mags are all about. But they also do exposés or, you know, investigative journalism, so they think, about various conspiratorial things that the church has on its mind, as, you know, predicted from L. Hubbard's conspiratorial talk and theories that he liked to espouse about how the bankers and psychiatry, mostly psychiatry, were out to get Scientology, and so they had to be exposed. And so Freedom magazine has wasted a lot of time and effort over the years exposing the evils of psychiatry. Then you have the Impact magazine, and that's the official publication of the International Association of Scientologists. And they'll have a few stories and whatnot in those, but mostly they're promo pieces for membership in the IAS, and they list names and statuses of how much people have paid for or contributed to the International Association of Scientologists. And for the big wig donors, they get their pictures in the Impact magazine, and they get special, you know, notice because of that. All right, within the Sea organization, you have various issue types as well, which are specific to the Sea organization, the most common of which are called flag orders. These are hardly ever quoted out on the internet or even really seen on the internet because not a lot of flag orders have made it out of Scientology. They're there, and they're kind of interesting. They're printed in black ink on white paper, and Hubbard called these the policies of the Sea Org. So where you have the green on white policy letters, in the Sea Org you have flag orders which could supersede the policy letters but only for the Sea Org. And flag orders cover lots and lots and lots of different things. In the early days of the Sea Org, Hubbard was just issuing reams of flag orders about how to sail ships, how to be a sailor, how to get around on a ship, what the ship was expected, how the ships were expected to be run. He didn't issue policy letters on that, he issued flag orders on that. Then when the Sea organization took over Scientology management, Hubbard set up a management organization within the Sea Org called the Bureaus, or the Flag Bureaus. And he issued a new type of policy for them called Central Bureau Orders, or CBOs. And I used to just read, you know, tons of these CBOs when I was a manager in Scientology because that's how we were expected to do our management job. It was according to these CBOs. Again, very little of these things ever leaked out. Although we were forced to memorize some of them. I could probably recite a few if you were that interested in them. You have Sea Org executive directives, which are, again, policies that are only supposed to be good for a year, that are issued by L. Ron Hubbard or various Sea Org executives. You have OSA network orders, which are specific to OSA, tell OSA how to do their job. You have AIDS orders. Originally, with Scientology management, Hubbard had a small coterie of aides around him that were people who were the direct managers of Scientology internationally. And Hubbard wrote various policies and issues for the aides, and he called them AIDS orders. Hubbard also wrote evaluations of Scientology organizations, which means he would look at a specific organization like Keokuk, let's say, And let's say Keokuk was not doing so great. So Hubbard would go through all the statistics and look at the personnel and look at all the information that was coming from Keokuk, and he would do what was called an evaluation. And he would write out a series of steps to do based on the evaluation to get Keokuk going again and get it operating and successful and wildly thriving. And he would issue these evaluations as aids orders. And he would give them to the aides and say, you get these done and you get my orders complied with in Keokuk so that Keokuk gets back on its feet. Hubbard issued hundreds of these aids orders over the years, mostly in the late 60s and early 70s. You had mission orders. I described earlier going out on missions. Well, when missionaries go out on mission, they are given written directives on what to do. It's a series of targets that they are to meet when they go out on their mission. They're not just sent out there willy-nilly. They're given mission orders. And the first mission order, the first step might be, let's say again that they're going to be sent to, you're going to send a mission to Keokuk. So the first target on the mission orders is read the mission orders. Then the next target is take responsibility for these mission orders. Then the next target is going to be get briefed by the mission operator on the mission orders. Then the next target is going to be go to Keokuk. Okay, so when they get to Keokuk, check, that target is now done. Then the next target might be meet with the executives of Keokuk and tell them that you're there and tell them why you're there and get their questions answered and proceed accordingly. So they do that as their first step once they arrive there. Then, depending on what the mission says to do, they'll be given a whole, litany of things, of directions to do, which are in their mission orders. And every day, they report to their mission operator on the status of each of the targets, whether it's done, in progress, whether it's bugged or not, whether they're not able to get the target done for whatever reason, or whether it's not done at all yet and they're going to get to it, right? So that's how missions are run in Scientology in a nutshell. And finally, Sea Org specific again, orders of the day. And these were fascinating. They were just little newspapers, really, that Hubbard issued every day on the ship when he was running the Sea Organization back when they were out at sea. And the OODs, or the orders of the day, which came right out of the Navy, as I understand it, because it's not, I think the Navy has orders of the day. And they were just kind of updates on personnel, on the state of the ship, on what things were going on, what port they were going to, how things went at the last port they were at. And again, there were just hundreds of these orders of the day. A lot of policies for the Sea Org and for Scientology came out of these orders of the day. You go back and look at them and you can see the roots of certain policies and certain actions that were taken organizationally from those OODs. So historically they have some relevance, otherwise they're not really that important to anybody in the here and now. There are a few other issue types that I'll cover quickly here that were not written by LRON Hubbard, but are used within the world of Scientology. And the longer Hubbard has not been around, the more these other issue types have been used. International management of Scientology has to have a way to communicate its desires and orders and directives to Scientology broadly. And it does so through management bulletins, international management bulletins, or IMBs. And there have been a few hundred of those issued over the years. And they either give directives broadly to, where Scientology is at, where it's going, State of the Union kind of stuff again, or more commonly, programs and directives on what to do about various things organizationally. Like there might be an IMB about how to get personality tests issued and evaluated and get more people in doing personality tests because they'd be interested, or at least used to be, in getting new Scientologists in, things like that. IMB's covered that. Then there is RTC, Inspector General Network Bulletins, or IG Network Bulletins. And these are directives straight from David Miscavige or from executives of RTC, the Religious Technology Center. And these are, at this point in time, the most senior directives within the world of Scientology, and they take precedence over policies, flag orders, bulletins, any of that. And the reason I say that is not because RTC IG network bulletins are supposed to be more senior than Hubbard's orders, but because within the culture and world of Scientology, RTC is the senior managing body, and David Miscavige is the head of RTC, and he's the one who pretty much issues most of the IG network bulletins. So his orders in writing to all of Scientology are issued through Inspector General Network bulletins. When 9/11 happened, an IG network bulletin was released called Wake Up Call. And that's an example of an IG network bulletin where in about 3 or 4 pages, David Miscavige laid out that, you know, terrorists had just attacked the United States, and it was time for Scientologists to wake the hell up and get busy getting people into Scientology and getting Scientology and doing Scientology and paying their money to get going and get busy, get active, you know, doing that. So that was his message following 9/11. And he, of course, you know, in the course of writing that issue, degraded the WOG world, you know, the outside world, for being a barbarism and full of stupid idiots who were more interested in their computers and their calculators and the internet than they were in life and being competent, able, good people. Well, I haven't found that to be true in my experience with the big wide world, but that was David Miscavige's message to Scientologists is, hey Scientologists, you guys have been slacking, now there's a terrorist attack, time to get busy, let's get going, right? And very inspirational stuff. So that is IG network bulletins. And finally, the last thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to issues within Dianetics and Scientology, the world of, are an issue type that doesn't exist anymore, but which you guys might find interesting. These were, in the 1970s mostly, they were called board technical bulletins and board policy letters, B-O-A-R-D, board, not board as in your board, but board like from the board of directors of the Church of Scientology. There was a time period where Hubbard was, you know, fugitive from the law, and where he couldn't be seen to be managing Dianetics and Scientology directly, because that would put him and the church at risk. And so it was given over to the board of directors, and the hell if I know who the board of directors was, but there was a board of directors of some kind, and they were issuing these bulletins and policy letters under their name. And these were printed either in red ink on cream paper or green ink on cream paper, bulletins, policy letters, about technical issues or policies that the organizations were supposed to follow. And it's kind of interesting only in that they were then, they were looked at as not being LRON Hubbard and therefore not as important and therefore not really, they didn't really count that much. And they were sort of in the late 70s, they were kind of wholesale canceled. But what really happened was a lot of those policy letters and a lot of those bulletins were just reissued on green ink on white paper or red ink on white paper with LRON Hubbard's name on them. And this happened with tons and tons and tons, like just volumes, reams of these things, were sort of quietly converted over to make it look like they had come from LRON Hubbard when in fact they hadn't. And so a great many of the policies and bulletins of Dianetics and Scientology these days are not from L.RON Hubbard. It's provable if you have the old copies of these things, but they, you know, one thing that David Miscavige is big on is shredding things, and so they'll just wholesale get rid of any earlier stuff when new stuff comes out. This is just common practice, out with the old, in with the new, within the world of Scientology. So the latest and greatest doesn't just usurp priority in Scientology when the latest and greatest comes out, but all the old stuff is looked at with contempt and to be done away with and destroyed, right? because it was bad and not, you know, not what L. Ron Hubbard intended, is how this is put forward. So that's the whole extent of it. Like I said, this might not have been the most exciting thing in the world, but I thought that it was important to kind of break some of this down so that this vast body of material could be more, you know, more easily understood for what it was, and maybe, you know, some parts of it can be looked at as more important than other parts. And when you're looking at some individual part of it, from a quote or from, you know, some reference online that you see, you can kind of place that into the, you know, the chronology and hierarchy of Scientology materials, and it can have, you know, some kind of relative importance to all the rest of it. So it's not all just one big glom of stuff. So I hope to that degree this video was educational and informative in that sense. And again, I thought this was important before we dive into the series, which I'll be doing probably in the next week or two. And we're going to get going on that. I've got a couple other video projects that I'm putting together, but we're going to get to this series real quick. And these 3 videos I've done so far as preliminary to that, I'll probably just put them into the series as well. So anyway, thanks for coming around and watching, and I will see you guys next time.